were held in Turin, in Italy. And at the time, I was in my second year of seminary studies in Rome. And it just so happened that the Winter Olympics were held in between our semestral break. So a couple of us decided that we were going to drive from Rome to Turin. It's about a 7-hour drive, basically due north. We got lost. We had tickets to the opening ceremonies that we got to at the very end of the ceremonies, which were spectacular, what we saw anyway. But it was a marvelous experience to be present for such an event, you know. And I'm not just saying this because the Olympics are on now too, but it made me think of it. We were able to see some of the events. The Olympic Village was just mobbed with people, and there was an enthusiasm in the city of Turin while we were there. One of the events that we went to was an event, a sport that I didn't know existed until 2006, women's hockey. I didn't know women's hockey existed until then. We wanted to go see, naturally, the other ice hockey games, the men's division. And who do you all want to see when it comes to men's ice hockey? Canada, Russia, the USA. Those tickets were not available. We got the only tickets we could get. We got Canada versus Italy women's hockey. I loved it. Women's hockey is far purer than men's hockey. But that wasn't even the best part. The best part about this experience was that we ended up sitting next to this Canadian guy who heard us speaking English to each other, so he just introduced himself and explained the entire game of hockey to us. It was an incredible experience. And then of course, when you're in a foreign country and everybody's speaking English, naturally the question comes up, what are you doing here? Why are you guys here? Well, you may find this hard to believe given the current state of affairs in our world, but we're studying to be priests. He was blown away. You're kidding me. You guys are going to be priests? How long? So we started to talk to him about what stages we're at and where we're studying. And towards the end of the game, he got up and left. But before he left, he handed us a 100-euro note and said, have dinner on me, guys, and walked away. Now, a 100-euro note to a bunch of cash poor seminarians, you might as well have dumped a pot of gold in our laps. It was the most amazing thing. And later on, I thought to myself, we got to find that guy so we can properly thank him. Right. We're going to find the guy at the Olympics. Right. What did we do to deserve that money? Not a thing. We were in the right place at the right time? Maybe. We didn't do anything to deserve it. We just were us. We were just who we were. We told the guy what we were doing, why we were in Italy, and that we just wanted to have a little fun in between our semestral break. And he thought it was the coolest thing he'd ever heard of in his life. We did nothing to deserve his generosity. Think about that. What must I do to accomplish the works of God? How often have we asked that very question in our own hearts, in our own minds, and within the context of our own faith? But it's actually an appropriate question considering the context of the Jewish religion of Jesus' time. In his time, there were 3 categories of the Jewish people. Either you were good, meaning you kept the law, you kept the precepts of the law, you did good things, your life was in conjunction with the law of Moses and how you lived your faith. Then there were the not so good people who didn't do anything. They didn't practice the law, they did no good. And then there were the in-between people. The in-between people looking for that one more good thing. The one more good thing that's going to categorize me as good. Their understanding of the law and the practice of their religion, of their faith, was that if I do enough good, I deserve God's mercy. If I do enough, then that's my ticket to eternal life. Their understanding of their faith was do, accomplish. Much like you might think of Olympians, right? If I train enough, if I discipline enough, if I do this, I get gold. If I do enough, I'll be the best at what I do. That was sort of the mentality of their time period. So the question that they posed to him then kind of makes sense in that context. But notice how Jesus responds to them. Believe. That's it. Believe. Perplexed by that answer. What do you mean? What do you mean believe? Okay, then what can you do in a very Jewish way, right? Well, what do you do then to make us believe? Do you know something that's interesting is that when we talk about the manna from heaven, which was read in the first reading, and Jesus mentions it in the gospel here, he gave them manna from heaven. Manna is a Hebrew word coming from the Hebrew manu, which means what is it? It really wasn't bread, right? Regular bread like we think of. It was like dew flakes. So the word manna actually means, what is it? What is it that you do that would make us believe? It wasn't Moses that gave you the bread from heaven. It was my Father that gives you the bread from heaven. And if you believe in the one whom he sent, he will give you the true bread from heaven, the bread that gives life. You ever wonder why Jesus uses bread? Bread is symbolic of life. But often the question is, well, what is it? What is this that you do? How often have we wondered those things in our own minds? What must I do to accomplish the works of God? What's the next thing that I have to do to be considered a good Catholic? What's the next thing I must do to get right with God? What's the next thing I have to do in practical terms? What do I have to do? Jesus answers us in the same way that he answers his would-be disciples in that moment. Believe in the one whom he sent. Believe. Believe in me. And if you believe in me, then I tell you, what I do happens on this altar, day after day and Sunday after Sunday. That this bread from heaven, this true bread from heaven, is my flesh for the life of the world. This bread is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. What must I do to accomplish the works of God? Believe. Believe that this is real. Believe that this is true. Believe that this is our life. I was watching some of the Eucharistic Congress this past week, and one of the quotes that I saw, or one of the speakers, and I forget who it was, I think it was a bishop, probably a bishop, maybe not. But anyway, we know what the Irish say, never let facts get in the way of a good story. Somebody once said that, in the context of the Eucharistic Congress, we have to stop living for Christ. We have to stop living for the church, for God, and begin to live from him. And I thought, what a marvelous expression. Stop living for the church. Stop living for God. Stop living for Christ and begin to live from him. Because from him, from this altar, is our life. And in many ways, when we begin to live from him, that indeed has implications as to how we live our lives. But it begins to become more and more free, more and more joyful, more and more peaceful. We begin to become more and more ourselves. Bishop Barron was commenting on just the athleticism of the Olympians the other day, and he says watching Simone Biles, for example, is like watching something majestic. Like watching Simone Biles is like watching someone who was flawless and free. And that's the point. When we begin to understand that what is it? That this manna, this true bread from heaven is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, we begin to live from that sustenance, from that life. Our lives begin to look flawless. Because we become more grounded in our sense of self. We become more grounded in our sense of who we are. And then that question of what must I do to accomplish the works of God becomes actually a non-question, because it flows from within ourselves. Right? We don't consume the Eucharist so that God becomes a part of us. We consume the Eucharist so that we become a part of him. And when we become a part of him, we begin to become ourselves. We begin to become grounded in a sense of a real identity in who we are. Just like a gymnast has an identity. Simone Biles knows her craft. She knows who she is. And we as Catholics don't have to ask the question, what must I do to accomplish the works of God? what must we do is simply believe. Believe in the one whom he sent. Believe that here, in our altars, in our churches, day after day, and Sunday after Sunday, this is our lives, and our life flows from this very sustenance. We become ourselves here. And that begins to foster a real, an intimate, and personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That's faith. And that relationship leads us to a deeper grounding in who we are. Relationship, identity, and then mission. That sets us up to become the men and women God created us to be in the first place. We're meant to be here. And our lives flow from what happens here. So I think to answer the question, why don't we do what Jesus tells us to do? When we ask those questions, what's the next thing I have to do? What do I have to do to become a good Catholic? What do I need to do to be considered good? Do the one thing he asks. Believe. Have faith. Have faith in the one whom he sent. Have faith in the one who is present at this altar. Have faith in the one in whom you consume. So that when you leave this place, when you leave here, life comes out of you. And that life is the very life of the Son of God. And that life leads us to becoming more and more the men and women we have been created to be in the first place. So why don't we take a moment in our hearts to think deeply about what Jesus asks us to do today, to answer that one simple question. Yes, Lord, I believe. So let us pray today, Jesus, meek and humble of heart, touch our hearts and make them like your own.